As my grandfather said, my name is Judah, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be able to be here. Thankful for the opportunity to be able to get some practice in before I go off to college this Friday. Very appreciative of all of you for being here. You're spending your night listening to some 18-year-old kid teach a little bit from the Bible when you could be doing tons of other things with your night. Or maybe some of you just came because you heard that there was going to be some ice cream and cookies later. So whatever reason you're here, I'm thankful for you guys. Many of you know that about 2 months ago, I graduated from high school. I graduated from Sumter High School, and it's funny how after all this time, I can still remember random times from my school and career. I remember one specific time in 6th grade in social studies class. We were going over geography, or more specifically, state capitals. Despite what my grandparents may tell you, I'm not actually a genius when it comes to the areas of like math or science, but I've always been decent at social studies or state capitals and geography. So the teacher was going around the room, making her way around the room, asking different students if they knew the capitals of certain states, and so she eventually got to me and said, Judah, do you know the state capital of Pennsylvania? When she said that, I knew I had it in the bag. My grandparents are from Pennsylvania, my dad's from Pennsylvania. I spent a ton of time up there as a kid, and so I just felt super, super confident, and so I said Harrisburg. The capital of Pennsylvania is Harrisburg, and she looked at me and was like, so close, but the capital of Pennsylvania is actually Pittsburgh. And I sat there thinking like, okay, whatever, and we went on with the lesson, and I was thinking, I'm pretty sure it's Harrisburg, and I went home and looked it up, and yeah, it was Harrisburg. I was right. But in that moment there, my teacher, she underestimated me. She thought that maybe I didn't know as much as I actually did just because I was younger. And I'm sure that's something that we all have experienced before, whether it be we were underestimated because we were too young once, or because they thought that we didn't have as much knowledge as we did. They thought that we didn't have as much experience as we did. It's not something that's fun to feel. And I want to take a look at a passage that talks about that. It talks about being underestimated. It's a passage that is typically directed towards a much younger audience than yourselves, but it's so very applicable, and I want to take a look at it. So let me read this verse from 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. Like I said, this verse is a part of the book of 1 Timothy. It's a letter written from the Apostle Paul to his protege Timothy. Timothy was a young Christian. He was able to sit under the teaching of the Apostle Paul. He was fortunate enough to be able to go on multiple missionary journeys with Paul and really just be able to sit under his teaching. They had a very special relationship, Timothy and Paul did. It was almost one of a father and a son. And throughout this entire book, the Apostle Paul is encouraging Timothy to pursue godliness over things of this world. He's encouraging Timothy in this chapter here to be encouraged, not to let those around him discourage him. Timothy was a young pastor. He was given the opportunity to be able to pastor a church in Ephesus. Ephesus, you may know, is one of the 7 cities that Paul writes to. So, like I said, I want to take a look at this verse from a different angle. Instead of looking at it from the perspective of the young pastor here, I want to take a look at it from the perspective of the older Christians within the church that might be tempted to look down on a young Christian. The Apostle Paul has laid out 5 ways that you can encourage younger Christians when you see them taking their faith seriously. The first way that you can encourage younger Christians is when they use their words to encourage. We see here in verse 12 that we're called to set an example through our speech. And I can tell you now that teenagers aren't known for often using their words for encouragement. Like I said, it's my generation, we often use profanity, we make fun of people, we gossip about people behind their backs, we make lewd comments. It's just to kind of sum it up, we talk in unwholesome ways. We talk in a way that doesn't reflect positively back on God. We talk in a way that just isn't right. The book of Proverbs tells us that words are important. It tells us that our words can either bring life or they can bring death. And often my generation, we use our words for death over life. I want to encourage you to point out when you see younger Christians using their words to encourage. Maybe you have grandchildren, when you see them supporting one another, when you see them uplifting each other instead of putting down one another, point it out. When you see them using good manners, when you see them being polite to other adults, point it out. It's hard for young Christians not to participate in this unwholesome talk. It's just built into society. So when you see them kind of differentiating themselves from society and using their words to encourage, point it out. I can tell you now that I am certainly not perfect with my speech, and there are many, many times where I don't encourage people, where I use my words to put people down, where I gossip maybe, but it's always been super, super encouraging to me over the years when teachers or grandparents or parents have just encouraged me. When they see me talking in a proper way, they encourage me, and that's meant a lot to me. The second way that you can encourage younger Christians is when they make wise decisions. I heard a statistic one time that young people's brains aren't developed until they're 25. That, along with the pull of the world and just society, young people often aren't known for making wise decisions. I remember a trend that was going around with my generation a few years ago where we would film ourselves eating and drinking laundry detergent. We would put it online, and my generation is known for having such dirty mouths, so even after all the laundry detergent that we consumed, it still hasn't cleaned our dirty mouths. So I don't know if we chose the wrong brand or what, but that just shows that my generation isn't known for making wise decisions. But that's why it's super encouraging when people do point out that we are making wise decisions. It shows us that we aren't just conforming to society. It shows us that we are separate from those that do choose to make unwise decisions. So I would ask you, do you have a young person in your life that you see making wise decisions? Maybe it's a grandchild, a neighbor, maybe even a young person here at Harmony. When you see them making wise decisions, point it out. Or maybe for some of you, you know of a young person who isn't making wise decisions, or they weren't making wise decisions. They were living for themselves, they were sinning, they were just making decisions that weren't reflecting in a good way upon God. They were living in a way that was against what God had told them to, but they've gotten back on track with God. They've corrected their ways. They're now living in a way that is seeking out God. They're looking to just to honor God in every day. They're making progress in that way. Point that out as well. It's encouraging to them. The third way that you can encourage younger Christians is when they love selflessly. The Apostle Paul here, he tells this young pastor to set an example through his through his love. And what is the essence of love? It's selflessness. To love selflessly, that's a hard thing for anyone to do, let alone young people. My generation, we often confuse the ideas of love and lust. We're programmed to think of ourselves first over other people. The idea is that I'm perfect, I'm amazing, I'm without fault, I just want to live for my life and for me. Those are ideas that are often promoted within my generation. They're thought to be true, and that's detrimental to my generation, that idea. But if you have a young person who loves you through spending time with you, through serving the church, through serving the community, or just any way that they're loving in a selfless way that's putting the focus on other people besides themselves, encourage that, encourage them to do that. By doing so, you're encouraging them to pursue godliness. I saw a statistic the other day about people in Polynesia. They're water people, and they have trained their bodies up to fish underwater for 8 to 10 minutes at a time with no oxygen. Now, the average person could never come close to that time. The average person can't go very long without oxygen. Just like the average person can't go very long without encouragement. It's encouraging when you do it. Like I said, it helps young people to pursue godliness. Okay? So we've talked about how you can encourage younger Christians when they use their words to encourage, when they make wise decisions, when they love selflessly. The fourth way that you can encourage younger Christians is when they stand firm in their faith. And the Apostle Paul knows that young people often aren't firm in their faith. That's why he encourages Timothy here to set an example through his faith. And I can tell you now, it would be very, very encouraging to see someone from your generation come up to someone from my generation who's going to church regularly and serving God and encouraging them. And maybe you know of a young person who has gone through a super, super rough time. Just seemed like life wasn't going their way. They were just facing all these things that for most people would wreck them, that would wreck their faith, but yet in the midst of all that, their faith never wavered. They were consistent in their prayer life, consistent in their time reading the Bible, and just despite all the craziness that was happening in their circumstance, they didn't let any of that affect their faith. Encourage that as well. They're showing that they're standing firm in their faith, that they're not just falling victim to the circumstances of their life. I saw, I did a research paper recently in an English class that I had, and I wrote about young people leaving the church. First of all, why they leave the church, and then ways to keep them within the church. And one of the ways that I found is most effective to keep young people within the church is through encouragement. When older people encourage younger people, it prompts them to stay at church. It prompts them to serve in church. It prompts them to live a life of faithfulness to God. The fifth way and the last way that you can encourage younger Christians is when they make their purity a priority. If you haven't been able to tell from what I've said so far, teenage culture is a very impure culture. It's everywhere. It's built into society nowadays. I mentioned that I recently graduated from Sumter High School, and I bet you that most of you didn't know that there's actually a daycare attached to Sumter High. It's for students who have had children. They can drop off their children at the daycare and then go on with their high school classes. And I don't know about you, but I think that's crazy. That's something that 5 years ago people would have thought that's crazy, but nowadays society just normalizes it, and that's sad. So how can you be an encouragement to younger people? How can you encourage younger people to remain pure? I think the first way is you can pray for them. You can tell them that you're praying for them. That even now, you're praying that God would provide for them a godly man or a godly woman to marry one day. You can tell them that you're proud of them, that you're excited to see all that God has in store for them. Think back to when you were younger. Think back to the people in your life that encouraged you, the people that in your life helped you to be where you are now with your faith. It's nice to have someone older than you with more experience that's maybe walked with Jesus longer than you have. It's nice when they encourage you, when they pour into you. Encouragement from an older generation is something that younger people need desperately. So moving away from the whole encouragement aspect, I would ask you, how are you doing in these 5 areas? Do you find yourself often using your words for things other than encouragement? Are you making wise decisions? Are you loving in a selfless way? Maybe for some of you, you've realized that you aren't standing as firm in your faith as you should be. I would encourage you with the perfect example of what it looks like to live out these 5 ways. Jesus, he's the perfect example. He lived the perfect, sinless life on this earth. He used his words to encourage. He made wise decisions. He loved in a selfless way that no one else did. He went to the cross for the sins of the world. He stood firm in his faith and in the mission that God had called him to, and he made his purity a priority. But I also want to encourage you with how the Apostle Paul closes out this chapter here in verse 16. He says, "Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so you will save both yourself and your hearers." Right there when he's talking about keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching, another way to put that is how you're living and what are you believing. And Paul says here to persist in this or to persevere in this. Now, I want to encourage you that most of you have done that. Most of you have lived a lifetime of faithfulness to God. A young person like myself is able to look at someone like you who has done that and say, that's what it looks like to live a lifetime of faithfulness to God. I love the promise that he has here at the end where he says, for by doing so, you will save both yourself and your hearers. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that you suddenly have the power to save people, the power to make people Christians? No, absolutely not. But what it does mean is that when people look at your life, your faithful life to Jesus, they're able to say like, hey, like that's something that I want to do. They're more inclined to trust Jesus, more inclined to have a lifetime of faithfulness to God. And I want to ask you, what would it look like if Harmony Church was known as the church in town where the senior saints are known as the lifeblood of the church? I mean, not only are they living for Jesus, but they're very quick to encourage other people to live for Jesus. I mean, imagine how much that would strengthen our church. I mean, it strengthened me. I'm very grateful to have two amazing sets of grandparents and two wonderful parents who have done that. They have encouraged me and prompted me to seek and serve Jesus from a young age. I'm committed to living in such a way that people won't be able to look down upon me just because I'm young. Will you all commit to encourage me and others like me? Thank you. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for just the opportunity to be able to meet tonight. Thank you for just everyone who's here, everyone who wasn't able to make it tonight. I pray that you would just be with us, that you would allow us to be able to have just a great fellowship time following this, that we would just be mindful of ourselves this week, the way that we speak, the way that we act, the way that we love, and just the way that we are. I pray that we would strive to be examples, strive to be a reflection of you. You sent your Son to this earth to die for all of us, and I pray that we would just remember that we would go about our week striving to be more like you and striving to encourage others to be more like you. Again, just thank you for all that you've done for us and all that you will do for us. We pray this in your name. Amen.